This is the Fall In podcast. We talk about responsible gambling, problem gambling, and recovery with a special emphasis on military service members and veterans. My name's Dave. I'm a veteran in recovery. And my guest today, Sam DeMello, the creator and founder of Evive, which he'll talk to you about in a little bit here. But first, I just want to say hi, Sam.
Hey, Dave. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's an honor to have you on, Sam. We've been talking to each other for a while, and I've been wanting to have you on, so I'm really, really grateful that you're here. We want to talk about things in this day and age. So much is happening in the gambling landscape, from the advent of sports betting and online casinos, the growth and expansion. With that comes a growth and expansion of people that are experiencing a myriad of different situations within gambling, right? From learning how to navigate it all the way through, what do I do now that I have a problem? One of the ways that you've kind of jumped in front of that is with what you're doing, right? And we're going to get into that. We're going to talk more about that because I'm so interested in it. But first, I want to know about you. Can you tell us a little bit about your story, your journey, and kind of what brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, totally. So I guess as a starting point, my name is Sam and I'm a compulsive gambler. I started gambling when I was 12 years old and I got into recovery about 5 years ago. I'm now 38. Like a lot of people my age, I started gambling playing poker when I was 12. Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker. It was on ESPN. You know, I was a pudgy, uncoordinated, not super athletic kid, right? And my best friends growing up were the opposite, right? They were like the captain of the basketball team. Poker, card games, it was probably the first thing I ever did that was cool, that I was good at. And it gave me this real entry point into masculinity with my friends, right? I felt like I was one of the guys the first time, maybe ever. And when I started gambling, I didn't have any concept of gambling harm, gambling addiction. I didn't even know that those things existed. Either did my parents, right? I started gambling, they looked at it and said, yeah, great. He's in the basement with his buddies playing poker for 10 bucks. He's not out on the street drinking. You know what I mean? He's not running around. Like, this is great. I got a poker table for my 15th birthday, and it was probably the greatest birthday present I ever got. You know? The way that I thought about gambling harm was if you're winning money, that's good. And if you're losing money, that's bad. And if you like lose so much money that you go into debt, that's when you really have a problem. And with that, I started gambling and, like, immediately, giant warning signs in my life, I couldn't set a limit on the amount of money that I was gonna gamble with, 10 bucks was 20, was 30, was me borrowing money from a buddy, I couldn't set a limit on time, like, I wanted to play all the time. When I got to college and there were people in dorms that liked to play poker, I played every night, when we got old enough to go to the local, tribal casino in California where I'm from, we went, and 1 night a week turned into 3 nights a week, turned into I spent most of my college career at the poker table. And so, definitely in retrospect, there were huge issues, but if I lost money playing poker and I had a bad night, I just had to stay out of the casino or work extra shifts at my job, to kinda make up for that money. And so I never really looked at it as a problem. And then in my early 20s, like a lot of people, today, I got introduced to online gambling and sports betting. And all of the barriers that had been in my life, social barriers, like I couldn't drop tons of money with my friends at a casino without them asking, what was going on. And I didn't have to get in a car or find a ride to go to the casino that was an hour away, right? I could just play by myself on my phone and nobody would know. And I went from, a $5 bet on the Golden State Warriors, just my hometown team. I'm from Oakland, California. I went from that $5 bet with my friends in a bar to a $100 bet on, like, Ukrainian women's ping pong at 2 in the morning in, like, 3 months. And for somebody that hasn't experienced a gambling problem, that probably sounds insane, right? But, to people that have been there, they get it, right? It was just this escalator, and I spent the next 10 years of my life just increasingly out of control, with my gambling and feeling shameful about my activity. You know, I saw my inability to control my gambling as a moral failing, you know what I mean? I saw it as being a weak person. You know, at the same time, my career took off. I started working in the technology industry, and all that meant was that all of this money that I was earning in my career, I was just lighting on fire online and in the casino, and as I kept feeling worse about my inability to control myself and stupid that all of this money was just going to the casino, I just went further into myself. You know, I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell my friends. I didn't even really want to admit that it was a problem. The way that I looked at it was like, as long as I'm making enough money to pay my gambling bill at the end of the month, like, that's fine, I don't have a problem. But I did. I had a huge problem. And as my external achievements, like promotions in my career, or I got to this point where I was just killing myself in the gym, you know, to try to exhaust myself so much that I wouldn't gamble. So I got into, like, really good shape, and people would say, "Oh my god, congratulations, you're doing so well," you know? And I would just be like, "Oh, if only you knew how much of a giant piece of shit I was."
It's so
You wouldn't
Jekyll
be
and Hyde, isn't it? I
Oh
mean,
my god, so Jekyll and Hyde, and you go to sleep at night and you're like, "That's it, I'm never gambling again," and I would, like, send an email to exclude myself from whatever offshore book I was playing with, and then I would wake up at 6 in the morning and be like, "Oh my god, I gotta pull that email back. I gotta deposit before they self-exclude me." You know, I gotta do the whole thing again.
are you feeling like nobody understands what you're dealing with? If you're struggling with a gambling addiction or feel like you might be, this app could change everything. Evive is an app that meets you where you're at in your gambling journey. Whether you're just starting with gambling, you're feeling like it's becoming a problem, or you're ready to leave it behind. This app provides insights and resources for every step in the journey to help you define and understand your gambling habits. There's help and hope available, and Evive is a great place to start the journey. Check them out today and redefine your relationship with gambling. Only available in certain locations.
And yeah, it was really miserable and heartbreaking and isolating, and I've never felt more alone, you know?
Right.
And finally, you know, after I guess I was probably 28 or 29, I started to look around at my friends and I was like, these guys are buying houses, getting married, having kids. What am I doing? I'm doing nothing. Like, I've been working nonstop for 7 years. I have no more money in the bank than I did when I started, right?
Right.
I have no hobbies. I have no activities. I haven't traveled. You know what I mean? Like, I haven't done anything. It's like these years just disappeared. I need to do something about this. Like, I think gambling is a real problem. And I went to a therapist that I just found online, and they didn't have any experience with gambling. I didn't know that I should find someone that has experience with gambling, right? I
Yeah.
didn't know
Yeah.
that gambling was even a thing you could go to therapy for, right? But I walked in and I said, "I have this bad gambling habit." You know? I didn't use the word addiction, right? I was just like, "I have this problem."
How would you know?
And
If you didn't
how
know it
would
was
you know,
addiction, how
right?
would you even know to ask? Like, we didn't even know what we didn't know, right?
No, totally. Like, I knew
Yeah.
something was wrong, but I still didn't really understand, like, that this was an addiction the same way that you can have other, you know, what I thought of as, like, real addictions, you know?
Right.
And the therapist immediately started diving into, you know, "Tell me about your troubled childhood, and tell me about your trauma and, you know, what you're using this to cope with." And I'm a, you know, middle class kid that grew up in Oakland, California in the '90s. I have 2 super supportive parents and a college degree and a great job, and that wasn't my story at all. If anything, it just confirmed for me that, like, I'm not worthy of needing help for this. People with real problems struggle with this. I'm just this, like, privileged kid coming in here with this, like, boo-hoo story, and so it wasn't very effective. I wasn't really ready for it, and they recommended that I go to Gamblers Anonymous. I had a really hard time, you know, A, this was a secret for me. I thought that if someone found out that I was struggling with gambling, I would be disowned by my family. My friends wouldn't wanna be friends with me. I would lose my job. Like, how would anybody give me a leadership position in a company that manages a budget if they knew that I was an addict, right? And so I waited until I was out of town when I was sure that no one would recognize me in a GA meeting. I was the youngest person in the room by, like, 30 years, and at that point, I was 28. And I was talking about gambling with cryptocurrency on my cell phone in the bathroom of my tech job, you know? And I just saw all these people that were like, "I've been in recovery for 30 years from the horse track." And I just felt like, "Man, these aren't my people," which is a totally ignorant and immature thought, right?
And yet it's understandable at that stage. Yeah, at that stage,
Exactly.
it's understandable, right.
And I go back and forth with that. Like, half the time, I'm like, I'm just this, like, ignorant, immature guy, and half the time, I'm like, yeah, I was in crisis, and that's really how I felt, you know? But in any case, that was my experience, and, by age 31, I just decided therapy doesn't work, GA doesn't work, I'm an addict, I now know that I am addicted to gambling, and I've been managing it for the last 10 years effectively. I'll just keep doing it. I'll just keep managing it, and as long as I make enough money, nobody will know, right?
Right.
Um, I mean, I guess I don't even need to say this, but that was a bad decision. Um,
Yeah, you didn't need to say it, but good that you
yeah,
did.
yeah, bad decision. I think I made it maybe 18 months after that before my life just lit on fire. What's funny is my gambling directly never got me caught. It was the symptoms of my gambling. I started drinking more, like, way more than I ever had because I felt
Okay.
so isolated, and I was self-medicating, and I would just get just ripping drunk, and I stopped sleeping. I started to struggle at work for the first time. I couldn't keep it together, I couldn't focus and produce enough to check the boxes that I need at work, and finally, what happened is that my fiancée came to me, and she said, you know, "I agreed to marry you 2 months ago. 90% of the time, you're this guy that I wanna be with, and 10% of the time, you're just this total asshole." Like, you're irritable and short-tempered and secretive, and you need to tell me what's happening, and maybe we can deal with it, but if you don't tell me, we're not gonna get married. And at that point, if you had asked her, "What is going on with Sam?" Gambling, gambling addiction, it wasn't even on the list. It wasn't even on the radar, and I made a very conscious decision, that I was gonna tell her, and I was gonna quit for good. Finally, I was gonna quit on attempt 300, whatever, or I was gonna kill myself, you know? Because I really just felt like if I choose gambling, which I know is ruining my life rationally, like, I understand that. If I choose that over this woman who I love, who is the future that I want, then I am a shitty person, then what's the point of being here? And I told her, and she's way smarter than me and, really supportive, and she helped me. Like, that broke my isolation. It helped me really hold myself accountable with somebody else holding me accountable to do the work that I needed and still need to do every day to keep myself in recovery, and yeah, that was the life-changing moment for me, and good lord, Dave, like, people always ask me who haven't been through it, like, "What does it feel like to get to the other side of a gambling addiction?" And, like, I never know how to answer that question, right? But, like, I struggle all the time, and I have days where I have urges to gamble, and I have bad days. But in general, it feels like I have superpowers, man. It feels like, in The Wizard of Oz, where in the beginning it's all black and white, and then she wakes up in Oz and it's in color for the first time? It feels like that, man. It feels like for the
Yeah.
first time, I can be myself authentically and, you know, just live a life that I'm proud of and try to show up for people in a way that, you know, is who I wanna be. It's really cool.
Isn't it amazing in the addiction, beyond the money and all that, just how all-consuming the addiction is, you know, of your time, of, your thought processes, of not wanting other people, quote unquote, to interfere with what you're doing, right? So relationships gets crushed. And then the way you just described that to be kind of through the fog or out of the fog of it, it is truly an amazing thing. I was just describing the other day, I was out working outside on my camper getting it ready for the spring, and my daughter showed up with my grandkids, right? So my 4-year-old granddaughter walks up to me, and the first thing that happens is she just throws her arms around me, and I just told her I missed her, and she said, "I miss you too, Grampy." Right? Then my grandson's sitting there in his little chair in his car seat because he's only 4 or 5 months old, and I look right at him and he gives me the biggest smile in the world, and in that moment, I felt what recovery feels like. Um, and it's so hard to describe to somebody who hasn't been there. And I always use the word Jekyll and Hyde, which is why I brought it up earlier, because it truly is when you're in the addiction, you can be living this life of the family guy, the working man, all these things, and yet this all consuming drive to just want a next bet, next bet, next bet. It's right there. You described it perfectly, Sam. And I am so glad to see you sitting here right now where you are in your life. So I'm truly grateful for that. So
Oh,
so
thanks,
from
man.
that now, right now, your life is beyond that. You're married now, is that correct?
Yeah, so I got into recovery in 2019, and my wife was originally from Boston, so we decided to move to Boston in 2020, which was great for me. Having an kinda change of scenery took away, I would drive in my hometown and be like, "Yeah, that's the card room that I used to play poker in," right? Or like,
Yeah.
Those are the buddies that I used to sports bet with." I think for me, the change of scenery was really nice, and we moved to Boston, we had our first daughter. I started working in, the health technology industry, which was so fulfilling. Like, I went from working in companies that I really cared about that were helping small businesses sell things, which is important. Like, I believe in small business, and I took this job at a company that made the first FDA-approved video game to treat ADHD in kids without, stimulant medication. Incredible technology, and I got to work there, and I was just like, "Wow, you can use software to, like, make an impact like that in somebody's life? Like, this is incredible," and I'm in recovery, and I'm married, and I have a daughter, and, my wife gets pregnant again, and, like, fairy tale, right? Everything is great. And then in January of 2023, I got unexpectedly laid off from that job, and, like, 45 minutes later, my wife got laid off from her job.
Wow.
Yeah, and, our oldest daughter was, like, 1.5 at that point, and we were trying to buy a house, and we were trying to have a second kid, and I just felt like, "Oh my god," my whole world just came to a screeching halt, you know? And now I have this combination of stress and financial stress and too much time on my hands, and even though I've been in recovery at this point, like, secretly for 3.5 years, I'm nervous. Like, I can literally see a casino in Boston from my window, right? Like, I need to do something.
That's the ultimate triggering moment.
Oh, yeah, it's the ultimate trigger,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah.
thank God I had enough self-awareness to
Mhm.
recognize that, right?
Good.
And so I started to look for a way to get involved in the problem gambling community in some capacity, just as a way for me to kill some time, and, like, keep my own recovery going. And I didn't really know how to do it, because I wasn't involved in GA at that point. And so I went online on Reddit, and I posted my story in a lot of gory detail, and I went to bed, and it was super cathartic. It felt great. I was like, "Oh, It feels really good to get this off my chest, anonymously. And then this crazy thing happened, and all of these people started writing back to me, and they were just like, "Man, what books did you read? And what do you do about this? And have you ever heard of this?" And, you know, there was just such a reaction to my post that it sent me down this rabbit hole. And I had a lot of time on my hands because I was unemployed, and I just started reading, like, what happens in the United States if you have a gambling problem? What do you do? Who do you call? Who pays for it? What do you do if you need services, right? And it just blew my mind. I was like, "This is crazy." We spend $32 billion a year on substance use, and 20 billion of that comes from the federal government. We spend, like, 150 million on gambling, and $0 comes from the federal government. Like, what's going on? If you live in a place like Massachusetts, where I live now, we have the most money of any state to address problem gambling for people in the Commonwealth. But if you live in a lot of other places, you have nothing. Like, there's literally nothing there, right? And I didn't even know about the military and the gambling in the military and the challenge for veterans and service members until I met you, man, at a conference and read your book, right? Like, I didn't even know the layers of this. But as I started to learn more, I just came to this place of, like, the gambling industry, especially the online sports books, they are using the best technology ever to make gambling as accessible and available and entertaining and personalized as they possibly can, right? They're using predictive analytics and high-level marketing and billions of dollars. And on the other side, we have very little, right? And what we have is not really technology enabled, right? The whole backbone of the American system in a lot of ways is 1-800-GAMBLER. And I think that that's a very important service, but I don't wanna call a 1-800 number for anything, you know? I'm 38 years old.
Was gonna say, do you think that's a function of your generation and younger generations? I know for my generation, the 800 number was kind of like the thing. I definitely think there's a place for it out there, but people your age and younger, you're right. Like I talk to so many people, my kids, friends of theirs, people I know that are in that age group that just don't want to call any number. They want instant access, but they don't want to be able to have to call and talk to somebody to do it. Is that kind of the motivation behind that? Is that where you're coming from?
I think so, yeah. I mean, for me, and especially for younger generations, you look for your support and your answers through technology. I think having to call somebody is one of the last options. I don't mean to disparage 1-800-GAMBLER because I think it's a very important service, but I also think that the gambling landscape has changed so much in the last, I mean, even since I stopped gambling 5 years ago, it's changed. But we need to meet people where they are, and where they are is on their phones and on, casino sites. And so I really got to this place in, the spring of 2023 where I just felt like we need to bring technology to this space. And I just spent the last 4 years working at a company that was bringing technology in this way to the cause of ADHD. Like, I need to do that for gambling. Somebody needs to do that for gambling, right? And I spent a couple months trying to find the company that was doing it, and I couldn't find it. And kind of reluctantly, I just got to this place where I was like, "I have no idea if this is gonna work, but I can't shake this feeling that this thing has to exist, and why not me? Like, why can't I do it?" And I found Jeff Marotta, Dr. Jeff Marotta, his name and his phone number on a report of state funding for problem gambling services, and I just cold called him, and I said, "Hey, man, I have this crazy idea. I think we need to build a digital tool that is like 1-800-GAMBLER, but in an application. Do it with me." Um, and Jeff, for better or for worse on his side, he agreed. Um, so we founded Evive in, like, May of 2023. We spent the first 6 or 7 months just building our initial prototype. Also, I shouldn't skip over, I found an absolutely amazing co-founder and the technical chops behind everything that we do online who agreed to build this with me, Phil Green, who's an amazing technologist. And the 3 of us, set out and built the first prototype and launched it in the App Store in the beginning of 2024, and I went on Brian Hatch's podcast, All In, the Addicted Gamblers podcast, and I told my story publicly for the first time, and I had a panic attack. At that point, it was not something that, like, my parents knew in detail, and I was just on this podcast going, "Oh my god, like, I can't believe this is happening." I can't put it back in the bag now, right? Like, it's out, and we got the first, 30 people to sign up and use the service at that point, and we started collecting feedback and looking at the data, and we just kept tweaking it and improving it, and we did that all last year. Our goal was to get a few hundred people to use the app last year, and we ended up getting over 1,000 people to download and use it, which was awesome. We launched a couple pilot programs with some really great organizations in the Oregon Health Authority and the Oregon Lottery and the Illinois Council. They were all huge supporters and just helped us get it into the hands of more people. And we took all of the data and all of the feedback, and we put out our first commercial version of the product in January of this year, so about 2 months ago. It's amazing, man. I mean, this crazy idea that seemed like a pipe dream, less than 2 years ago, is now this application that is really helping people. We are now kicking off statewide partnerships with Nevada and Oklahoma and Massachusetts and Virginia and Louisiana and hopefully lots more states to come. And the whole goal here is that eVive is not, this app that you have to use every single day and it has every answer that you could possibly need. It's really that this app is the digital version of 1-800-GAMBLER. It has tools that we've built into it, tools to help you better understand your relationship with gambling, and tools to help you develop new coping strategies to manage your urges around gambling, and tools to help you track things, and education to help you learn more about behavior change and addiction or safer gambling practices if you're someone who is new to gambling. But the other piece of it is that as we work with states, we are able to build in all of their resources into the app. So their whole infrastructure of certified gambling counselors and peer support groups and inpatient treatment centers and all of these things get built into the application so that when they are going out and trying to help people in their community, instead of just saying, "Do you have a gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER." They can say, "Hey, anybody who gambles, download this free app and learn more." What happens is that the people that need help, they get it for free, right? They don't have to pay anything for eVive because the state is
Right.
working with us, and what the state gets is all of this incredible data around the needs of the community. Who is struggling with gambling? Not, personal information, like demographic information, right? What are the challenges and what are the resources that people are looking for? And so it's really about amplifying with technology everything that public health is doing and trying to, use that to advocate for better services and better funding and help more people engage with whatever they need. Like, I'm agnostic, if there are 100 people in a room that are struggling with gambling, there's 100 different solutions, right? For some people, it might be peer support, and for some people, it might be deeply understanding how gambling affects the brain, and for some people, it might be the language that they need to have that conversation with their wife, you know? Um, and our job is just to show up and meet them where they are and give them support without judgment or stigma.
I've heard Evive compared to a very popular, and I'm not gonna mention the name here for I don't know if there's copyright issues or whatever, but there's a very, very popular eating and weight management app that's out there right now that many, many people are subscribing to and using, and I've heard Evive called the gambling version of that particular app because it covers the entire spectrum from I'm just stepping into the realm of gambling and discovering it all the way through I have a serious problem and I need help. But the most important part is you're covering all those steps in between where I'm starting to feel like I'm more of an itch for it. I'm starting to spend more money doing it. I'm noticing I'm missing time from work, or you know what all the signs and symptoms of a developing gambling addiction are. The amazing thing about eVive is it allows you to catch that at a point where you have a choice to do something about it before it gets worse, right? Which is
Totally.
so much of the missing piece out there today. Is that a fair way to say it? You kinda get the whole continuum there?
Yeah, 100%. You know, I think that there are a lot of apps out there that are working to empower people in recovery from a gambling addiction, and I think that that's really important, and it's also something that we do at Evive. Like, I use Evive every day, and I am in recovery, and I use it to keep it that way, right? But if you look at the problem from a public health perspective, right? One of the biggest challenges is that the number of people who are experiencing harm is huge, and the number of people that are seeking help is very, very small. And to really move the needle on gambling related harm, which is my goal, right? From a public health perspective, how do we address this thing at scale? I think that we have to build pathways for people at any stage of gambling to address what is going on with them. When I look at my own experience, right? When I first started gambling, man, I wish I knew what gambling addiction was. I wish I knew what gambling harm was. I wish that my parents knew what that was, right? I sat down and, I had those embarrassing conversations with my parents about sex and drugs, you know, and it was uncomfortable, right? But it was on their radar. I wish that gambling was there, right? So, a big part of our safer pathway in the app is that, like, how do we get this message out to people? And one of the ways that we're doing it is kicking off a research project at, a couple universities, right? Where I think, man, college kids, they come to campus, all of a sudden, there's gambling everywhere, and they're old enough to sports bet, and how do you deal with that? And then I think about the 7 or 8 years I spent in escalating gambling harm, and at some point, you would have been able to pinpoint a moment, maybe, if you were a clinician, and say, "Okay, Sam has now crossed the threshold into a disordered gambler," right? But it wasn't just like this light bulb moment I had, it was this progression, right? And I think about these early experiences I had where I woke up the next morning and I was like, "Woof, I do not like what this feels like." You know? I spent way too much money, or I went on a date and I spent the entire time looking at my phone under the table for some basketball game that, like, I don't give a shit about. What is going on? At that point, I didn't self-identify as someone with an addiction. I definitely didn't self-identify as somebody that was ready to walk into a GA meeting, but I would have identified as somebody who might wanna take a deeper look at what was going on. It's tricky because on a personal level, like, if someone came to me and said, "I'm struggling with gambling. What should I do?" I would say, "Stop. Stop right now." You know? Like, it's the best decision I ever made, right?
I wanna turn a little bit of a corner because, first of all, what a phenomenal piece of technology in an age where we need exactly that, right? I mean, celebrate that because to have that available and out there, and you're making increasing connections with more and more states and public health bodies to be able to make this available to more and more people. You read my book, so you know that a lot of the things that you just said resonate with me because I can remember the feeling in the military of I wish I had known this was a problem or this was an addiction so that I could have had the ability to make a different choice. And I kind of try to focus on that population because they're generally about 2 to 3 times the risk of the general population. Not that that's not important. We're all important, right? But I focus on that because that's where I came from. Do you envision in the future maybe hoping to find a way to make a broad-based availability of eVive for the military and veterans community? Can you foresee that in the future?
Absolutely, like 100%. I think that the power of technology here is that we can use technology to show up for whoever is using it specifically for them, right? With the tools that we know are gonna be the most impactful for them. And so when I think about, eVive compared to a helpline, for example, if we want to provide service from a helpline in Spanish, we need to go and recruit a bunch of people who are bilingual, right? Whereas with technology like this, we can translate this application into Spanish, right? And do that at scale. And so my vision for eVive is that it continues to get better and better and better and better at showing up for specific groups of people. And I don't
That's
see
great.
this as, right now, if you look at the education, a lot of it is written by me in conjunction with our scientific advisory board, who are these incredible scholars and researchers like Jeff and Dr. Tim Fong and Dr. Deborah Haskins, like brilliant people. Um, but my hope in the future is that there are pieces written for active duty military members and veterans written by active duty military members and veterans, right? That can speak to them about, you know, problems or situations that are more specific to their reality. Like, I've never been stationed overseas where my number 1 source, maybe my only source of entertainment was a casino. And so I think this is the next evolution of eVive that I'm the most excited about, working with Christina and how do we make content that specifically addresses issues that might, affect women, right, as a group experiencing gambling harm. But right now, eVive is available to anybody in the United States for free. They can download it. They can, it just asks you what state you're in, and then either your access is sponsored by a partner in that state or it's sponsored by eVive. Would love to work towards making this available worldwide so that folks that are stationed overseas can access it as well.
That's fantastic. I mean, and the fact that pretty much anybody within the states can access it now is just it's amazing. And by the way, when you say Christina, just for the people who might not know, Christina Cook is the creator and host of the Broke Girl Society. That's another podcast that's out there with a heavy emphasis on gambling and problematic gambling within among women. Another very underserved community in terms of this space is women, and there's an increasing and out on a daily basis of the number of women that are getting into trouble with gambling. I appreciate you mentioning her. She's phenomenal. She's amazing, and all of the podcasts, all of that information that's out there is good. Kind of your grand vision for eVive moving forward. You see it going nationwide. You see it going global at some point. How long do you think before we can break the borders of the US and reach out, into other countries?
My vision for eVive is that this becomes a platform that can connect anybody that, gambles with the best possible resources that they need, right? That it empowers prevention, harm reduction, and recovery, right, from gambling, and that we are addressing gambling harm at scale. I think in terms of how we do that, I don't know what the features of eVive are gonna look like in the future, right? We started with journaling and checking in on a daily basis and guided meditations and urge management tools and, education because those are the pieces that are really rooted in evidence, right, and studies, right? Like, these things work. But as we start to get more people using eVive, this is the beauty of it, right? We start to really see what's happening with people. So, like, a great example of this is if you would have asked me 2 years ago, "What do people feel the day before they relapse or they slip?" Right? I would have said big emotions. They're really sad or they're really angry. But when we start to look at the data that we have from, thousands of people checking in every day, we see that the 2 leading indicators are that they're feeling tired or they're feeling complacent, which, of course, when I look back at my own experience, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, totally." It was those moments where I was feeling, everything is fine. And so we can start to use that data to say, "Man, maybe we need to prioritize helping people with things like sleep scheduling, right? Or self-care, right?" My vision for Evive is that it's really this conversation between the people that need help and the people that are providing the help, and that we are just using technology to make all of those things better. In terms of making this available, worldwide, I would love to do that. I think that the next couple of places that we're really focused on are the UK and the European Union, and then Canada. I think the challenge for us is how do you show up for people in a way that is personalized and localized enough for them, right? Like, I could flip a switch right now and make this available in Canada, but I wanna make sure that we have all of the right, Canadian public health systems onboarded, and if somebody needs help
Yeah.
with the suicide and crisis lifeline, that we're getting them there, right? But my hope is that by the middle of this year, that eVive will be much more widely available.
That's great. So if somebody wants to learn more about eVive and what it is and what it does, where can they go?
Yeah, so you can find eVive in the App Store if you have an iPhone or if you have an Android. It's available on both. You can also find more information on our website, which is www.getevive.com. That's GETEVIVE.com. The last thing that I would just say there is the most valuable thing that you can do is use the app and send us your feedback, right? This is how we've built the entire thing to where it is, and it's really, really nice and motivating and makes me feel like I'm on top of the world when people send me messages that say, "This thing is great and it's helping me." Like, truly, I it makes my day, but it's even better if you say, you know what? I was using this feature and I wish that it did this." you or
Yeah,
this thing
yeah,
could be a little better.
for
Um,
sure.
so yeah, we are all ears, and we really see this as a community-based endeavor, right? We're trying to advocate for everyone that is struggling here.
I'm so honored to have you here with me, talking with me and sharing what how this is growing and how this is becoming a force in the educational and public health community. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me. To those of you out there who might be struggling, please reach out. You're not alone. As you just heard Sam talk about as telling his journey, many of us felt like there was nobody could understand what we were going through. Let me tell you, there are people who can. Reach out. If you're in crisis, dial 988. If you're a veteran, dial 1. Of course, always the 1-800 Gambler line is available. And if you have eVive, by all means, use the eVive app and reach out to your local resources. So, from one recovering gambler, Sam, to another, thank you so much. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.